Where Pierre Allard is, as I said off the top, not a stranger to a lot of you. He has appeared many, many times on 100 Honey Street over the years. For those of you familiar with my Eye to Eye show, I one time did a full hour's interview with him. And I still get people commenting on that insight into a remarkable man. Thanks, Pierre, for coming our way.
My pleasure.
It's good to see you back. You just look as good as ever, haven't changed a bit. Pierre, you were Chaplain General for Canada for 11 years. And you have left that, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But I'm interested in knowing how it all began. How did you get into chaplaincy in the first place?
Well, I began as the chaplain in Archambault Penitentiary. That's a penitentiary in the north of Montreal, probably at that time the worst maximum security prison in Canada. I was working on the streets of Boston with heroin addicts. And that was my introduction to a world of crime, because to feed their habit, a lot of them were involved in crime. And I wanted to come back to Canada, and there was a position open at Archambault. I applied and was the successful candidate. Now, Dostoevsky has said, you want to judge a society, enter its prisons. I have found this to be very true. I have always felt that it was an incredible privilege to be called to work as a prison chaplain. Why do I say that? I say that, Jim, because becoming acquainted with prisoners, it's becoming acquainted with the many faces of evil, but it's also becoming acquainted with the very wounded side of humankind. When you earn the trust of prisoners and listen to some of their stories, you say, well, by the grace of God. Now, I've never asked pity for prisoners, but at times I wonder if more churches and more people took the time to really go beyond the media. Just one story, I was asked one day to call two prisoners, they called them the twin brothers, tell them their father had died. So I called them, I said, I'm sorry, I don't really know you, but I have bad news for you. Your father died this morning. I was not ready for their reaction. When I said that, they jumped up, they gave each other the high five, and they said, finally, the bastard is gone. And that story has always followed me, because I was wondering what kind of family environment would you have to have known that the day we tell you your father is dead is not a day of grieving, but a day of rejoicing. So if you had met me like in the mid-70s, I would have spoken to you with some enthusiasm about discovering a very deeply human world. But all of this was to change for me in a sense, because in 1980, my brother Andrew was brutally murdered and abandoned on the south shore of Montreal. Now I was a victim. I was a victim, and so I needed to discover a vision that would allow me to continue to work with prisoners with the same enthusiasm. And I started searching, and this is when I discovered a restorative justice, which I think, if we understand it well, is biblical justice. You have to draw your circle wide enough so that you can embrace both the victims, but also that you can embrace the perpetrator, and you can embrace the community that has been hurt. And the more I started dealing with this, I discovered the kind of vision that allowed me then to stay in chaplaincy, but also to challenge the churches and say to the churches, let's look at it like Jesus would look at it. Let's embrace, let's renew, let's bring a restoration.
You make a point in some of your material that when a law is broken, it's more than the law that has been broken.
Absolutely.
A relationship has been broken.
Yeah.
And there is a definite connection between the breakdown in the relationship and the breaking of the law.
Well, Jim, yeah, because what you've just said, it's the definition of restorative justice. Restorative justice says when a crime happens, it's much more than the breaking of a law. It's the breaking down of human relationship where real people have hurt real people in the community of real people. And then the more important question than guilty or not guilty is, how do we bring healing? How do we bring healing in these communities? So when I became the head chaplain, I think that part of my greatest challenge was to try to convince the chaplains across the nations that we should try to work within the vision of restorative justice. You see, because if your vision is not bigger than your worst problem is going to sink you.
Yeah.
So you have to have a vision that is broad enough and bigger than your worst problem. And so if you're involved in issues of crime, you have to have a vision that embraces both.
Now, before we talk about Just Equipping, your new effort and what you're doing in Africa, you quoted Dostoevsky off the top.
Yeah.
You were chaplain general. You were in all the prisons in Canada. What do the prisons of Canada tell you, Pierre Allard, about Canada?
Well, I think that when I wish, in a sense, that the nations of the world would have as good a correctional system as Canada has. Now, not everything is perfect, and there's a lot of things to be done better. But I think there's a sense of professionalism. At least the Correctional of Canada has a clear mission, and we say we're going to live according to those values. What worries me, though, in the last few years, is that deeply influenced by our neighbors from the South, there's a kind of a punitive, more drastic type of measures that are being introduced at times, and instead of investing in areas that are restorative, like, for example, the circles of support and accountability, which one of the greatest programs in the world, is not getting the financial support that it deserves. And they should, because this is where the community has become alive and embraces both the victim, embraces the offenders, and bring healing in our communities. So overall, it's a pretty good system, but I would like to see like more investment in the areas of community building, community initiative that really bring about reconciliation and restoration.